Kyle Larson has won 2 NASCAR Cup races this season and is third in the standings. Normally, this qualifies him for the Cup playoffs. He did not, however, compete in the Coca-Cola 600 on Sunday, having finished 18th in the rain-delayed Indianapolis 500. According to NASCAR regulations, a driver must compete in every race to qualify for the playoffs, unless they acquire a waiver. Could NASCAR forbid him from entering the playoffs? What is your opinion on it? This week, multiple figures from NASCAR have commented on the system, asking for better rules and more guidance. Could this hurt Larson's title aspirations? Joey Logano describes the Larson scenario as the grayest rule we have in our sport. Logano stated that drivers had obtained exemptions due to racing and off-track injuries. Logano explains the major distinction in Larson's situation. He decided the Indy 500 was more important than the Coca-Cola 600. That's the facts. Logano admitted that many individuals were engaged in Larson's decision-making process, and that trying the double was the most badass thing that anyone can do. Larson will have to request a waiver to participate in the Cup playoffs. Should this be granted? I don't know where you go with that, Logano said. Logano later stated on social media that he feels Larson should receive the waiver. And he wasn't the only one, as his team owner also feels Larson should be able to enter the playoffs. Roger Penske and General Motors Racing Chief Jim Campbell both feel Kyle Larson and Hendrick Motorsports should be granted a waiver so that Larson may compete in the 2024 NASCAR Cup Series playoffs. That's up to NASCAR, Penske said. I mean, certainly I want to see him not lose anything by coming to the Indy 500 for sure. But Larson came here with Hendrick Motorsports to race. They did a great job, and I think it's great for the sport. It's really good for NASCAR. I know they will handle it properly. Larson was already guaranteed of a position in the NASCAR Cup Series playoffs after winning 2 of the first 13 races in 2024. However, his eligibility is now in doubt after missing the Coca-Cola 600 at Charlotte Motor Speedway to race in the 108th Indianapolis 500. Rain caused a 4-hour delay in the 500-mile race on May 26th. Larson and Hendrick Motorsports owner Rick Hendrick, together with Vice Chairman Jeff Gordon, chose to prioritize Larson's efforts in the Indy 500 by having Justin Allgaier start the 600 in Larson's number 5 Chevrolet stock car. Larson made every effort to retake his ride in the race, arriving in Charlotte at 9:13 p.m. each Sunday night. 10 minutes after he arrived and waited in the pits to take over the ride, a storm slammed the speedway and the race was called off. Racing never resumed, and the race was declared official, with Christopher Bell winning. Because Larson missed a NASCAR Cup Series race, he must obtain a postseason waiver from the sanctioning body in order to compete in the playoffs. To be eligible for the playoffs in NASCAR, a driver must start all 26 regular season races. In the past, waivers were granted to drivers who missed races due to injury, but were still eligible for the playoffs. This would be the first time a driver had received a waiver to compete in another major racing series after missing a NASCAR Cup Series event. Well, first of all, the Hendrick organization will be interfacing with NASCAR on that. Campbell, the U.S. Vice President of GM Performance and Motorsports, said, "What Kyle did for all motorsports was really elevate the profile of what's happening in NASCAR. Also, his skill set to apply it to another series like IndyCar and show his skill set. He's an amazing driver. He's a NASCAR champion. He shows that he can run in any different series, and he elevated all motorsports and got attention. We have IndyCar fans that are now checking out and becoming fans of what's happening in NASCAR because of Kyle, and then I think there are some NASCAR fans checking out a little bit what's going on with IndyCar, so I think it's a win all the way around. The decision is up to NASCAR, and I know the Hendrick organization is making the case." So, can Kyle Larson, who was delayed at Indy when strong storms pushed the start back, be granted a playoff waiver despite missing the 600 race? Let's discuss the waiver system. Before exemptions were added into NASCAR's championship system, if a driver missed a race for any reason, they received no points. In a close championship race, that may be the difference between a title and an afterthought. Thus, drivers would race injured, ill, or under other difficult conditions. There needs to be a means for a driver to recover from an injury or attend a family emergency without jeopardizing his season. The playoff system is more suited to this situation, although there are options that may also work in a full season championship scenario. Waivers function in the following way. If a driver is unable to compete for any reason, the team may ask for one. It allows a driver to safely heal from an injury outside the race car. It also permits a driver who is unwell, has a family emergency, or has a death in the family to attend to those matters without being penalized for circumstances beyond their control. Those are all very reasonable reasons to skip a week or two, but things got complicated. drivers missing numerous weeks due to racing or non-racing injuries, NASCAR suspensions, and, most recently, a driver choosing to skip a race to compete in another series are all instances that have arisen. NASCAR has given waivers for long-term NASCAR race injuries, Kyle Busch in 2015, as well as those sustained in other hobbies, Chase Elliott and Alex Bowman in 2023, and sickness, Jimmy Johnson in 2020, though he eventually missed the playoff cut. NASCAR has also granted them to drivers who have been suspended by the sanctioning organization for rule infractions, Elliott, 2023. That implies Larson will very certainly receive one as well. Larson would not have been permitted to stay in Indianapolis if Hendrick Motorsports had believed that was in dispute, because the regulations compel drivers to start every regular season race or receive a waiver to be qualified for the playoffs. There is just too much at risk to gamble. In Larson's case, sponsorship comes from Rick Hendrick's business portfolio, but there's still too much at stake to jeopardize the season for what amounts to a casual flirtation. In addition, the excitement surrounding Larson's attempt at the double benefited NASCAR. While it is not uncommon for NASCAR to capitalize on publicity while punishing the driver who provided it, just ask Ricky Stenhouse Jr., it is unlikely to happen here. And at the end of the day, if NASCAR will grant waivers to suspended drivers, negating the punishment, there is no reason to believe it will refuse Larson. However, Larson's return to IndyCar racing has reignited interest in the waiver system. Should NASCAR make any modifications to the system moving forward? The system requires an overhaul, and NASCAR has three options that make more sense than the existing method of operation. First, NASCAR may retain things as they are with a few noteworthy changes. For example, a suspended driver should never obtain a waiver. They were suspended for a cause. Giving them a waiver afterward is the same as saying, well, you shouldn't have done that, so we had to punish you, but don't worry, it doesn't really count. It should count. Really. Furthermore, NASCAR must clearly define what waivers will and will not be issued. How many weeks missed is too much and should be changed to better luck next year. Should injury waivers be limited to injuries experienced in the Cup Series and not cover extracurricular activities? That may be too extreme, as drivers must be allowed to have a life outside of the track. Deals like Larson's are a little different because he was merely running away. The doubters are correct that the decision was ultimately Larson's, and he did not select NASCAR. On the other side, Larson drew attention to the Coca-Cola 600, which benefited NASCAR. Penalizing a driver for doing something beneficial to NASCAR is a stupid concept. On the other side, NASCAR may eliminate the waiver system entirely and tighten the qualifications for entering the playoffs. A top 20-point criteria should already exist, and a win should not overrule it. A driver might possibly miss one or two races and still qualify. NASCAR may still demand a justification for missing races, but teams are unlikely to risk it unless there is a solid one. It would also rule out the prospect of a driver missing many weeks, which is acceptable. At some point, there should be better luck next year, as long as there is something in place to keep them from returning too fast. Fans would no longer have to worry if a driver should be allowed to skip a race for whatever reason, since, in principle, they could miss as many races as they wanted. However, few people will wait out for anything trivial since it carries a significant risk. A last idea would be to award each driver a one-race waiver at the start of the year, which they could use any way they wanted. Any absences lasting more than one race would need to be evaluated. Sure, it allows a driver to take a week off without justification, but this is unusual. First, the team would have to run a substitute driver that week. Thus, team owners and sponsors would most likely not agree to a trip to Hawaii instead of a race. The one race provided would also discourage frivolous justifications due to the possibility of a genuine need for it later on. If NASCAR refused to award a second waiver if the driver was injured after using the first one because they disliked Talladega Superspeedway, that would not be a problem. Larson should undoubtedly be granted a waiver this year based on previous history. However, NASCAR must re-examine the system as a whole, close the suspended driver loophole, and consider a way to ensure that drivers can step out of the car for a week or two if necessary, while also making every effort to ensure that paying fans see their favorite driver at the track, unless there are extenuating circumstances. What are your thoughts on the waiver system? Should the rules be better formulated? And should Larson get a waiver? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below.